I'm Beatrice Thorne, 78 years old, a woman, and my own daughter called me a loser and banned me from her party. Those words, spoken so casually from the child I raised, have echoed in the quiet corners of my little house for weeks. A loser. It's a strange word to hear at my age. My life has been long and I thought full. I have known great love, profound loss, quiet joys, and the gentle rhythm of a life lived simply and honestly. I have never measured my worth in dollars or status, but in the warmth of my home, the health of my garden, and the love of my family. It seems, however, that my daughter Catherine uses a very different ruler. My husband Arthur was the same as me. He was a good man, a structural engineer who saw the beauty in foundations and things built to last. He used to say, "B, character is like concrete. Nobody sees it, but it holds everything up." We built our life on that principle. We lived in the same small, sturdy house for 50 years. We raised Catherine within these walls, her laughter once a melody that filled every room. Arthur and I weren't wealthy, but we were rich in a way that mattered to us. We had each other and we had our daughter. We believed that was enough. For Catherine, it never was. Even as a little girl, she was drawn to the shiniest toy, the most popular friend, the dress in the window of the most expensive shop. We saw it as youthful ambition then, a sign of a child who wanted more from life. We encouraged it, perhaps foolishly. We wanted her to have every opportunity we didn't. That desire, a parent's most powerful and dangerous instinct, became the story of our sacrifices. I remember when she was accepted into a prestigious private university on the East Coast. The tuition was astronomical, a figure that made Arthur and me sit at our small kitchen table in stunned silence, staring at the acceptance letter as if it were a bill from a foreign country. We didn't have that kind of money tucked away. Arthur's salary was steady, but it was meant for mortgages, groceries, and a modest retirement. But Catherine's face when she told us, it was pure, unadulterated joy. She saw her future unfolding, a golden path leading far away from our simple life. How could we deny her that? A week later, Arthur came home from work and placed his father's vintage gold watch on the table between us. It was his most prized possession, a gift from a man he'd lost too soon. It was beautiful, a timepiece of intricate gears and quiet elegance. "This is a key, B," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "It can unlock her door." We sold it. We never told Catherine exactly what we sold, only that we had found a way. She was too wrapped up in her own excitement to ask questions. Years later, when I mentioned it in passing, she just shrugged. "Well, that's what parents are supposed to do, isn't it? Support their children's dreams." The sacrifice had been downgraded to a mere transaction, an expected fulfillment of parental duty. The love and loss woven into it had vanished entirely. After Arthur passed away 10 years ago, the silence in this house became a physical presence. Catherine was there, of course, for the funeral. She and her husband, Mark, were impeccably dressed and appropriately somber. Mark was a man who seemed to have been born wearing a suit. He was a deal maker, a man who spoke of leveraging assets and market optics. He assessed my home not with sympathy, but with an appraiser's eye. I could see him mentally calculating the property value, wondering if I'd sell. A few months later, they announced they were buying their first proper home in a gated community an hour away. They were short on the down payment. Catherine called me, her voice a practiced blend of casualness and urgency. "Mom," she'd said, "we found the perfect place. It's an investment, really, but the banks are being so difficult." I understood what she was asking. Arthur's life insurance was not a fortune, but it was my security, the cushion he had painstakingly built to ensure I would be safe. I took a deep breath and gave them nearly half of it. Again, it was an investment in her happiness and her future. They sent a thank you card with a stock photo of a beach on the front. Inside, it just said, "Thanks, Mom, you're a lifesaver. Love, C and M." Since then, their visits have become rare, like spotting a cardinal in winter. When they do come, usually for a brief hour on Christmas or my birthday, they treat my home like a museum of a forgotten era. Linda will run a finger over my polished oak dining table, a wedding gift from my parents, and say, "Oh, Beatrice, the things you hang on to, so much clutter." Mark will stand stiffly in the living room, refusing to sit on my comfortable floral print armchair, as if its worn fabric might infect his expensive trousers with poverty. They speak of their country club, their trips to Europe, the new German car Mark just acquired. I would listen, smile, and ask about their lives, hungry for any detail. I would show them my new rose bushes or the quilt I was working on, and their eyes would glaze over. My world, the world that had built and launched theirs, was now a quaint, embarrassing footnote in their glamorous lives. I was the old foundation of a skyscraper, buried and forgotten beneath layers of steel and glass. The news of the party arrived not via a phone call or a personal invitation, but through an accidental discovery. I was scrolling through the local online newspaper looking for the schedule for the summer farmers market when I saw a picture of them. It was Catherine and Mark beaming under the headline, "Local Power Couple to Celebrate 30th Anniversary with Lavish Gala." The article was fawning, describing Mark's business acumen and Catherine's impeccable taste. It mentioned the event would be held at the most exclusive hotel in the city, a place with crystal chandeliers and valet parking, a world away from my quiet street. My first feeling was a pang of hurt that I had to find out this way, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of motherly excitement. 30 years, it felt like only yesterday I was helping a nervous Catherine into her wedding dress. A celebration was wonderful. I imagined a grand family affair, a chance to see my daughter shine. My mind immediately went to the gift. What could I give a couple who had everything? Another store-bought object would just be lost in their home, another piece of clutter. I wanted to give them something from the heart, something that held a story. I went up to the attic and found my old cedar chest. Inside, beneath my own wedding veil, was a box of photographs and negatives. I spent the next week hunched over my dining room table with a magnifying glass and a special light, carefully restoring an old black and white photograph of Catherine's wedding day. It was a candid shot Arthur had taken, one I loved. It wasn't perfectly posed, it was real. Catherine was laughing, her head thrown back, and Mark was looking at her with an expression of genuine adoration, a look I hadn't seen on his face in years. I bought a simple, elegant silver frame for it. It was a piece of their history, a reminder of the love that started it all. I felt a quiet pride as I wrapped it in tissue paper. With the gift ready, I finally called Catherine. I was buzzing with excitement. "Kathy, darling, I saw the article, a party, how wonderful, 30 years, I can hardly believe it." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, right, that." Her voice was flat, devoid of the excitement I expected. "Yes, it's coming up." "Well, I'd love to help if you need anything," I offered. "I could help with the flower arrangements or address envelopes, whatever you need." I could hear Mark's voice murmuring in the background. Catherine cleared her throat. "That's very sweet, Mom, but it's all being handled. We have an event planner." Of course," I said, a little deflated. "Well, I can't wait to celebrate with you both. I have the most perfect gift for you." The silence on the line stretched for a long, painful moment. "Mom," she finally said, and her tone had shifted. It was the voice she used when she was about to deliver bad news, the voice of a manager firing an employee, not a daughter speaking to her mother. "About the party, it's really more of a business event. Mark and I are hosting some very important clients, investors." "Oh," I said, my heart sinking. "I see, but I'm your mother, it's your anniversary." "I know, but you wouldn't know anyone. You'd be uncomfortable," she said quickly, the words sounding rehearsed. "Everyone will be talking about business, about the market, it's just not your scene." The excuse was so flimsy, so transparent, it was like a pane of glass. I could see the truth right through it. She was ashamed of me. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. "Catherine," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what are you saying?" "Please don't make this difficult," she sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "We're trying to project a certain image. It's crucial for our brand, for the business. Having you there," she trailed off, searching for the words. "It just makes us look like we came from nothing. It suggests, I don't know, a lack of pedigree." A lack of pedigree. I, the woman whose parents had helped build this town, whose husband had designed half the bridges in the state, lacked pedigree. I, who had sold a piece of my own family's history to give her a future, was a liability. "I don't understand," I stammered, clinging to a desperate hope that I was misinterpreting her. "I just want to be there for my daughter." "And you can be," she said, her voice brightening with false cheer. "We'll do a quiet little brunch or something, just us, the week after. A consolation prize, a pity meal." The final words came out in a rush, as if she coo. "Elle didn't wait to be rid of them. Look, Mom, you're a sweet lady, you really are, but in our world with our friends, you just look like a loser. A loser. The word detonated in the quiet of my kitchen. It wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict. A final judgment on my life, my choices, my very being, delivered by the one person I had loved most in the world. So please, she finished, her voice softening now that the fatal blow had been struck, just stay home, it's for the best. I don't remember saying goodbye. I think the line just went dead. I stood there, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. On the table, the beautifully wrapped photograph in its silver frame seemed to mock me. A memory of a love that I thought was foundational, now revealed to be nothing more than a prop for a life I was not invited to. I sank into a chair, the silence of my home rushing in, no longer peaceful but suffocating. I was 78 years old, and my daughter had just told me I was a loser. And for the first time in my life, alone in my little house, I started to believe her. The days that followed that phone call were painted in shades of gray. The sun would rise, casting its usual golden light across my living room, but I barely noticed. The vibrant colors of my garden, typically a source of immense pride and joy, seemed faded and distant. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage built of memories. Every photograph on the mantelpiece, every piece of furniture, whispered of a past that had led to this unbearable present. I was adrift in a sea of my own life, with no land in sight. Grief is a strange country. I had visited it before when I lost my parents and most devastatingly when Arthur died. But this was different. That was the grief of absence, a sharp, clean amputation. This was the grief of presence, the presence of a daughter who was still alive but had chosen to excise me from her life as neatly as a surgeon removing a tumor. It was a living bereavement. I would sit in my armchair, the one Mark refused to touch, and stare at the wall for hours. My mind would replay the conversation, dissecting every word, every pause. A loser. The word was a splinter in my soul, and every attempt to dislodge it only pushed it deeper. I started to see my life through Catherine's eyes. This house, which I loved for its cozy warmth, suddenly seemed small and shabby. The second-hand books I cherished, the chipped teacups I'd collected, the very clothes I wore, did they all scream failure to the outside world? Had I been living in a fool's paradise, believing a life of simple means could have any value in a world that only respected wealth and status? I questioned every decision I had ever made as a mother. Had I given Catherine too much? Had our sacrifices not taught her gratitude but entitlement? By providing the down payment for her house, had I inadvertently funded the construction of the very walls that now kept me out? I felt a profound sense of failure that hollowed me out from the inside. Perhaps Catherine was right. Perhaps I had lost at the game of life without ever understanding the rules. The night of the party was the worst. I knew the date and time from the newspaper article. As evening fell, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the growing darkness, imagining the scene at the hotel. The sound of champagne flutes clinking, the murmur of conversations I wasn't privy to, the sight of my daughter, beautiful and radiant in an expensive gown, moving through a crowd of people she valued more than her own mother. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, invisible to the one person I wanted to see me. Out of a morbid curiosity that felt like pressing on a bruise, I opened my old laptop. It took a few minutes to boot up. I navigated to a social media site and searched for Mark's name. His profile was public, a curated gallery of his success, and there it was. The first photo was of him and Catherine, posted just minutes before. She was wearing a shimmering silver dress. A diamond necklace I'd never seen before glittered at her throat. They were standing in front of a massive floral arrangement, their smiles wide and brilliant for the camera. The caption read, "Celebrating 30 years with the love of my life and our wonderful friends, feeling so blessed." My finger traced Catherine's smiling face on the screen. There was no trace of guilt, no hint of sadness for the mother she had excluded. There was only triumph. I closed the laptop, a wave of cold, desolate clarity washing over me. The quiet brunch she had offered was a lie, a token meant to placate me which she would likely forget to schedule. I was not a part of her blessed life. The pain was so immense it finally broke through the paralysis. I couldn't just sit here anymore. I couldn't let this sorrow be the final chapter of my story. I needed to move, to do something, anything, to feel a connection to a time when I didn't. To feel like a ghost, I needed to feel Arthur's presence. With a sudden burst of energy, I pushed myself out of the chair and headed for the stairs. The attic. It was dusty and filled with things I hadn't touched in years, but it was where Arthur's things were. His old drafting table, his boxes of books, the remnants of his life's work. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to be surrounded by his things, by the tangible evidence of a man who had loved me unconditionally, who had seen me not as a loser, but as his queen. As I pulled the string for the attic light, illuminating a world of shadows and memories, I felt the first flicker of something other than pain. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was resolve. A resolve to find my way back to the woman I was before my daughter's words tried to erase me. The air in the attic was thick with the scent of old paper and cedar wood, a fragrance that was pure Arthur. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the bare bulb like tiny, forgotten ghosts. This was my husband's domain, a repository of his life's passions and projects. In one corner stood his old drafting table, its surface scarred with the ghosts of 1,000 blueprints. In another, boxes of his favorite engineering and history books were stacked high. Being here felt like stepping back in time, to a world where I was loved and valued without condition. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool surface of his drafting table, half expecting to feel the familiar warmth of his hand over mine. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but up here, surrounded by his quiet strength, it felt manageable. I wasn't sorting with any real purpose at first, just touching things, opening boxes, letting the memories wash over me. I found his old university sweater, a faded photo of us on our honeymoon, a bundle of letters I had written to him when he was away on a project. Each object was a small anchor to a life I knew was good and true, no matter what Catherine thought. Tucked away under a stack of old blankets was a heavy, dark wood trunk. It was Arthur's memory box, the place he kept his most personal effects. I hadn't opened it since the week after he died when the task had been too painful to bear. Now it felt like a necessity. I lifted the heavy lid, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, nestled amongst his father's war medals and our first set of house keys, was a smaller lockbox made of polished mahogany. It was a simple thing with a small, unadorned brass lock. I knew the key was on the same ring as the key to his old filing cabinet, which I kept in a dish on my dresser. I retrieved it, my heart beginning to beat a little faster with a curiosity I hadn't felt in a long time. With a small click, the lock opened. The contents were not what I expected. There were no sentimental trinkets or old love letters. Instead, it was filled with documents. The top layer was our marriage certificate and Catherine's birth certificate, which made me smile sadly. But beneath them was a thick, leather-bound folder. On the front, in Arthur's neat architectural script, were two words, Thorn Private Holdings. I lifted the folder out. It was heavy, filled with crisp, official-looking papers. I opened it to the first page. It was a stock certificate. The company name, Omni Tech Solutions, meant nothing to me. I saw the date, 1985. I vaguely remembered Arthur talking about it. He had a friend from college who had started a tiny computer company in his garage. Arthur had been fascinated by the concept. It's a wild gamble on the future, he had told me one night. A little flutter, don't even think about it. It'll probably amount to nothing, but it's exciting to have a tiny piece of what's coming. He had invested a small sum, money we barely missed, and then, as he'd advised, I had forgotten all about it. I flipped through the folder. There were more certificates, documents detailing stock splits, reinvested dividends, and corporate mergers I didn't understand. It was a dense financial language from a world I had never entered. To me, it was just a pile of old paper, a testament to one of Arthur's forgotten hobbies. For a moment, I considered putting it all back in the box. What did it matter now? But then I thought of Catherine's word, loser. I thought of her dismissal of my life as having come from nothing. A spark of defiance ignited within me. This folder was something. It was a piece of Arthur's foresight, a secret he and I shared, even if I hadn't known it. I needed to know what it meant. My mind immediately went to Samuel Vance. Samuel had been Arthur's best friend since they were boys and our lawyer for over 40 years. He was semi-retired now, but his mind was as sharp as a tack. He was a man of integrity, cut from the same cloth as Arthur. If anyone could make sense of this, it was Samuel. My hands trembled slightly as I carried the folder downstairs and found my old address book. I dialed his number, my heart thumping against my ribs. He answered on the second ring, his voice as warm and reassuring as I remembered. Beatrice, what a pleasant surprise, is everything all right? Samuel, I'm fine, I said, my voice a little breathless. I'm sorry to bother you, but I found something, some old papers of Arthur's. I don't know what they are. It's a folder full of stock certificates for a company called Omni Tech Solutions. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Samuel spoke again, his casual, friendly tone had evaporated, replaced by one of sharp, intense focus. Beatrice, he said slowly, did you say Omni Tech? Oh, yes, that's it. Is that important? Don't touch anything, he said, his voice urgent. Don't move the papers, don't talk to anyone about this. I want you to sit tight, I'm coming over now. The line went dead. I stood in my silent living room, the heavy folder in my hands, a strange feeling blooming in my chest. It was a mixture of fear and something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the electrifying thrill of the unknown. The future, which had seemed like a closed door just hours ago, had just been blown wide open. Less than an hour later, Samuel Vance's sensible sedan pulled into my driveway. He got out of the car with a speed that belied his 75 years, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of grim intensity. He had been a rock for me after Arthur's passing, handling the estate with quiet compassion. Seeing him stride up my walkway now with such purpose sent a nervous flutter through me. Beatrice, he said, foregoing the usual pleasantries as he stepped inside. Where is the folder? I led him to the dining room table where I'd left it. He placed his briefcase down, opened it, and pulled out a pair of reading glasses and a laptop. He handled the old leather folder with a reverence that took me by surprise, as if it were a fragile, sacred artifact. For the next hour, he was a whirlwind of focused activity. He spread the documents across my table, his eyes scanning them with incredible speed. He muttered to himself, tapping furiously on his laptop, cross-referencing numbers and dates. I simply sat and watched, a silent observer at the unfolding of my own life's greatest secret. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. He looked at me, and his face was a mask of pure astonishment. Well, Arthur, he whispered to the empty room, you magnificent old son of a gun, you actually did it. He turned his gaze to me, and it was filled with a mixture of awe and profound sympathy. Beatrice, do you have any idea what this is? I know it was a small investment Arthur made a long time ago, I said softly. He told me to forget about it. Samuel let out a short, sharp laugh that was half sputter, half gasp. Forget about it, Beatrice, Arthur's little flutter, as I'm sure he called it, was in one of the foundational tech companies of the digital age. Omni Tech Solutions didn't just succeed, it became a global behemoth. It merged with other giants. These shares, they've split and split again and again. The dividends have been reinvesting automatically into a managed trust account for 35 years. He took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. I've done a preliminary valuation. I'll need to confirm with the brokerage firm tomorrow, but based on today's market closing price, Beatrice, you are not just financially secure. You are the majority shareholder of a private trust fund worth, well, it's in the 8 figures. A very significant 8 figures. The number he quoted was so vast, so incomprehensible, it didn't even sound like real money. It was an abstraction, a string of zeros that had no connection to my world of grocery budgets and utility bills. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the information. Me, a multimillionaire, the idea was absurd. I was Beatrice Thorne, I darned my own socks. I made jam from the berries in my garden. I was a loser. A hysterical little laugh escaped my lips. Samuel, that's impossible. It's not impossible, it's fact, he said gently. Arthur set this up as a blind trust. He didn't want the knowledge of it to change the way you both lived your lives. The statements were sent to a P.O. box that he alone managed. When he passed, the account simply continued to grow, untouched and unnoticed. It was his ultimate safety net for you. He just never got to tell you about it. I looked down at my hands, resting on the worn wood of my dining table. They were the hands of a woman who had kneaded dough, pulled weeds, and held her crying daughter. They were not the hands of a wealthy woman. And yet, everything had changed. The shame and humiliation that had been my constant companions for weeks began to recede, replaced by a towering, righteous anger. My daughter's words echoed in my head once more. It makes us look like we came from nothing. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. She and Mark, with their leased cars and their mountain of debt, had been play acting a life of wealth, while I, her loser mother, had been sitting on a fortune that could buy and sell their entire hollow existence 10 times over. The wealth itself was secondary. It was the truth that mattered. The truth was that my husband had built an empire for me in secret. The truth was that the foundation I stood on wasn't small and shabby. It was made of solid gold. A new strength, cold and clear, solidified within me. The tears of a victim were gone, replaced by the resolve of a woman who had just been handed a sword. Samuel, I said, my voice steady and clear. You mentioned Catherine and Mark's business is called Jennings Lifestyle, correct? He nodded. Yes, I've heard of it. All style, no substance, from what I gather. I want you to find out everything you can about it, I instructed, the words coming to me with a certainty that surprised even myself. I want to know who they owe money to. I want to know the exact state of their finances. I want to see the cracks in their foundation. Samuel watched me, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. He saw the shift in me, the transformation from a grieving widow to a formidable matriarch. He was seeing the woman Arthur had always known was there. Consider it done, Beatrice, he said, beginning to gather the papers with a newfound sense of purpose. I have a feeling things are about to get very, very interesting. He was right. This wasn't about revenge, not in the petty sense. This was about rebalancing the scales. It was about teaching my daughter a lesson she should have learned long ago, that true worth has nothing to do with what you own and everything to do with who you are. And she was about to find out exactly who her mother was. In the weeks that followed, Samuel Vance became my general. From the war room of my small dining room, he executed my strategy with the precision of a seasoned field commander. His investigation into Jennings' lifestyle was swift and brutal. The picture he painted was even worse than I had imagined. Catherine and Mark's company was not just a business. It was a fantasy, a house of cards built on high-interest loans, leveraged assets, and a dizzying amount of debt. Their lavish lifestyle, the parties, the cars, the European vacations, was a performance funded by creditors who were rapidly losing their patience. Their brand was on the verge of implosion. Samuel, acting on my behalf through a discreetly formed holding company, began to quietly purchase their debt from third-party lenders. It was a simple, legal financial maneuver. To the outside world, it would look like a vulture capital firm circling a failing business. To me, it was the slow, deliberate tightening of a net. The first sign that the pressure was working came from a rumor I heard from a neighbor whose niece was a caterer. The talk of the town was that the Jennings annual charity gala had been abruptly postponed. Then I saw it with my own eyes. I was driving home from the grocery store when I saw Mark's prized German sports car being loaded onto a flatbed tow truck in front of their house. It was being repossessed. I felt a grim satisfaction, but no joy. This was a necessary, painful surgery. The rot had to be cut out before any healing could begin. The inevitable finally happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and there she was, my daughter, Catherine. She looked diminished. The designer clothes hung on her as if they belonged to someone else. Her face, stripped of its usual confident makeup, was pale and drawn. The arrogance that had been her armor was gone, leaving behind a raw, desperate fear. She was holding a bouquet of supermarket carnations, a pathetic, transparent peace offering. I opened the door. Mom, she said, her voice cracking as she thrust the flowers at me. I was just in the neighborhood. I wanted to see how you were. I took the flowers without a word and put them on the hall table. I did not invite her in, but simply stood there waiting. Can I come in? She asked, her eyes pleading. I stepped aside. She walked into my living room, the one she had so often criticized, and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. She sank into the floral armchair, the one her husband had always snubbed, her body slumping in defeat. She tried to make small talk, asking about my garden, my health. The words were hollow, a pointless prologue to the real reason she was here. I let the silence hang between us, forcing her to be the one to break it. Finally, the dam burst. Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. "It's all gone, Mom," she sobbed. "Everything, the business, it's falling apart. The creditors are calling day and night. We're going to lose. The house, we're going to lose everything." She looked at me, her face a mess of tears and desperation. "We heard a rumor that you came into some money, from Grandpa's estate or something. I don't know if it's true, but if it is." She leaned forward, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Mom, you have to help us, please. I'm begging you. You're my mother. You can't let this happen to us." There it was, the moment of ultimate hypocrisy. She wasn't apologizing for the cruelty, for the humiliation, for abandoning me. She wasn't begging for my forgiveness. She was begging for my money. My value to her was and had always been purely transactional. She had called me a loser when she thought I had nothing, and now she was calling me mother when she thought I had something she could take. Just then, a second car pulled up. It was Mark. He came rushing in, his own face a mask of panic. He saw Catherine crying and immediately joined the plea. "Beatrice, please, we made some mistakes, we overextended, but we can fix it with a small capital injection. A loan will pay you back with interest, we just need to get through this." They stood before me, a united front of desperation, the self-proclaimed titans of industry reduced to groveling at the feet of the loser in her shabby little house. I listened to their pleas, their excuses, their empty promises. I let them exhaust their arguments until there was nothing left but a raw, pleading silence. I looked from my weeping daughter to my frantic son-in-law. I felt a great, weary sadness, but also a core of unshakable steel. The Beatrice who would have wept with them, who would have handed over her last penny to soothe their self-inflicted wounds, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the difference between helping and enabling, and the enabling was over. I let the silence in the room stretch, allowing the full weight of their desperation to settle. They looked at me with the pleading eyes of children, expecting a soft-hearted maternal rescue. That was the role I had always played, but the script had changed and I was now the director. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, measured, and devoid of the emotion they expected. "I will not give you a loan," I said. The hope vanished from their faces, replaced by utter shock and disbelief. Catherine's mouth fell open. "What, Mom? How can you say that? We'll be ruined, we'll be on the street." "I will not," I repeated, my voice as firm as granite, "give you a handout to continue living a life you cannot afford and have not earned. I will not throw good money into the black hole of your vanity." Mark stepped forward, his tone shifting from pleading to indignant. "Beatrice, this is your daughter you're talking about. Have you no heart?" "It is because she is my daughter that I am doing this," I replied, turning my gaze to Catherine. "For your entire life, I have given you everything you wanted. I sold heirlooms for your education. I gave you my security for your house. My love and my sacrifices became your assets to be leveraged and then discarded when they became inconvenient. You built a life on a foundation of my love, and then you were ashamed of that very foundation." I let that sink in before delivering the next line. "However," I said, watching as a flicker of hope returned to their eyes, "I will not stand by and watch the legacy my husband and I worked for, the legacy that funded your education and your first home, be turned to dust by your foolishness. So I will not give you money. I will do something else. I will save the company." A look of confusion passed between them. Just then there was a knock at the door. It was Samuel Vance, right on schedule. He walked in, carrying his briefcase, and stood beside me, a silent, imposing presence. "What is he doing here?" Mark demanded. "Mr. Vance is my lawyer and my primary business advisor," I said coolly, "and he is here to present my offer." Samuel opened his briefcase and laid a single, thick document on the coffee table. "The offer is quite simple," he announced to the stunned couple. "Mrs. Thorne, through her holding company, which, as of this morning, is the sole proprietor of your outstanding debt, is prepared to forgive that debt entirely. She will inject enough capital to make Jennings' lifestyle solvent and operational, saving it from bankruptcy." Catherine and Mark stared at him, speechless. This was more than they could have dreamed of. But Samuel continued, his voice sharp, "This is not a gift, it is an acquisition. In exchange for this, Mrs. T. Thorne's holding company will assume a 51% controlling interest in Jennings' lifestyle. Effective immediately, she is the new majority owner. She is your boss. The color drained from Catherine's face. You want to buy my company, she whispered in horror. I am buying our company, Catherine, I corrected her gently. And we are going to make some changes, T. The era of smoke and mirrors is over. We will focus on products of quality and value. We will treat our employees and our customers with respect. We will build a business with a foundation that can last. I stood up feeling a sense of authority I never knew I possessed. You will both keep your jobs, you will need the income, however, you will not keep your titles or your corner offices. Mark, I said, looking at my son-in-law, your expertise in logistics will be put to good use. You will be the new warehouse manager. Your first task will be to conduct a full inventory. You start Monday at 8 a.m. Mark looked as if he'd been slapped. The warehouse, that's absurd. It is that, or you are welcome to seek employment elsewhere in this economy, Samuel added dryly. I then turned to my daughter. Catherine, your new title will be head of customer relations. You will be on the phones. You will personally handle every complaint from every customer who was let down by your previous business practices. You will listen to their stories and you will make it right. You will learn firsthand the human cost of cutting corners. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a combination of fury and utter bewilderment. This was not the ending she had envisioned. She had come for a check and a hug. Instead, she was being handed a headset and a demotion. She had wanted a bailout. I was giving her a reckoning. The story doesn't end there, not really. It's an ongoing chapter. The past few months have been difficult. I sit at the head of a boardroom table now, a place I never desired but have come to command. The business is stabilizing. We've rehired employees who were laid off. Mark, to my surprise, has found a grim satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos of the warehouse. Catherine, she is still struggling. I hear her on the phone some days, her voice strained but patient, listening to an angry customer. The arrogance is gone. In its place is something fragile, something tentative. Perhaps it's the beginning of humility. Our relationship is not healed. The wound is too deep for that. There are no cozy Sunday brunches. But last week, she called me after a long day. She didn't ask for anything. She just told me about a particularly difficult customer whom she had managed to help and how good it felt to solve a real problem. It was a small thing, a tiny seed planted in the scorched earth of our past. It may never grow into the great tree it once was, but for the first time in a long time, there is a flicker of hope. She may finally be learning the lesson her father and I tried to teach her all those years ago. That success isn't about the image you project, but about the character you build. She wanted an ending she never saw coming, and that is what I gave her. Not an ending, but a new and much harder beginning. The world will tell you that a quiet life is a small life. It will measure you by the size of your house and the balance in your bank account. But I have learned that a person's true worth is like the root system of an old tree. It runs deep, it is unseen, and it is what holds you steady when the storms come. My wealth did not give me strength, it merely gave me a tool to reveal the strength I had all along. And that's my story. Thank you for listening.